So, Andrew, thanks so much for joining me on this call. And we were talking just a half hour ago, and I was asking you, I said, hey, let's talk about, precognitive dreams. And you were telling me, well, that's actually the least interesting thing that you talk about. So, could we go back into that story you were telling me? Because I thought that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll kind of start from the beginning, and if I go too far, just stop me. But the way I see it, the precognitive dreams, at least as far as I'm concerned anyway, they got my attention, and that's kind of what they were for, one could say. If they had a purpose, I think that was the purpose. And the reason is because they're not supposed to happen. I mean, if you accept the narrative that you get in school and just about everywhere else, and what science tells you, and science, by the way, I think it's kind of silly to say there's any kind of unibody entity called science, but we're taught that paranormal things just don't happen. And one of those things is precognition or visions of the future. How could anyone possibly know what's going to happen at a later date when there are so many variables and factors involved that are completely unpredictable? So that's a sensible argument, and I thought, that precognition was just as ridiculous as the existence of ghosts, the existence of God, and just about anything else you could name. In fact, everything else you could name. However, I have always remembered my dreams pretty clearly, and I was in the habit of describing them to my wife before we got married, actually, and continuing to this day. And at a certain point, early on in our relationship, she started telling me, you're having precognitive dreams. You're dreaming about the future. And I thought, uh-oh, I'm going out with a moron. And then later, uh-oh, I'm married to one, which, I really hate to say, because she's a wonderful person. We've been married for almost 35 years now, and I think she's just awesome. But I was having this worry that, uh-oh, she's, got a screw loose here. And the thing is, I didn't like the position I was put in those conversations, because she was saying, you are, and I was saying, I'm not. And I couldn't really go much beyond that, because I realized I was saying I'm not because I just didn't believe it was possible. So I preferred, saying I'm not, and here's the evidence to show that I'm not. Whereas in her side, from her point of view anyway, she did have evidence, because she was basing what she was saying on what I told her and how it seemed to correlate with later events. So from her point of view, she actually has more information than I do, even though we're working from the same pool of information. The difference is that I was ignoring it, and she was paying attention to it, okay? So on that level, I was thinking, well, she's obviously misunderstanding what she's hearing from me, and the way she's comparing it is incorrect somehow. So I started taking notes of my dreams. I figured, what, this is going to prove it once and for all. I'm going to write these down, and then we're going to wait, and you're going to say this is a precognitive dream, and I'm going to go back, I'm going to find the record, and I'm going to prove to you that you're combining like 5 different dreams, for instance, in order to say I had one precognitive dream. Or you're going to exaggerate something. Like I'll have described something very vague, and you'll make it very specific. And in that way, I'll show that you're like making a mistake. But very quickly, the dream journal proved that she was completely right. I mean, there were some things happening that had so many, that were so specific, and there were so many details matching, that I found it very difficult to argue that precognition wasn't a factor. And I could go into a lot of them, but one of the examples I like to use, and I wrote about in one of my papers, I had a dream that I was with a friend of ours, my wife Kitty and I, and we were down near the World Trade Center, and we were looking at shops, and he showed me this very complicated looking watch. And then I was asked if I wanted free tickets to watch Tom Hanks play tennis. Okay. There were a few other details, one of which is so disgusting I don't want to mention it, but it involves how homeless people go to the bathroom in front of people at night. But anyway, so it was this combination of details. So later that day, that exact friend asked Kitty and I if we'd like to go walking around the World Trade Center with him, because they just opened the new atrium, and he was an architect and he'd worked on it. He wanted to show it to us. And while we were there, we went into a shop, and they had these pocket watches, at which point he told me that he designed pocket watches for fun in his spare time. And so we were going into that, which is a detail that matched the dream. And we left the store. A producer walked up to me and asked me if I wanted free tickets to watch Tom Hanks play tennis with another an actress. I think it was Daryl Hannah, but I'm not sure about that point, so I'm not going to say it's for sure. But the idea that I was being offered tickets to watch him play tennis for free, I mean, and it's on the same day that I have the dream, right? I mean, that's unlikely. And then combined with the fact that that particular friend was there, and combined with the fact that watches were important, and combined with the fact that as we left, he saw a homeless person going to the bathroom, and he pointed out to me, to my everlasting regret, I looked, it was disgusting. But that also was in the dream. To have all of those things combined within the same, couple of hours on the same day as the dream, I just find that really unlikely. And there are a lot of dreams like that too. And the funny thing about it is that for the most part, I could kind of sift through the elements of the dream. If you look at the elements of the dream as line items, so like I write this sentence, and this one, you just number them all. Like let's say there are 30 sentences, right? Now out of that group, some of them you're just never going to be able to check because they involve a person I don't know or have never met or something. So there's no way to check it. So you take those off. So now you're left with 25 lines. And then let's say 5 lines have to do with my mood. Well, that's not data. That's just how I feel. So that's not really important either. So you take those out. You're left with 20 items. And of those 20 items, 10 of them can be checked. And the other 10 are so generic that even if they can be checked, they're meaningless. It's like, I had coffee, but you have coffee every day. So you kind of ignore that, right? So so out of those 30 line items, you've got 10 that you can check. And out of those, they all match in some way something that happened on the same day. Okay, and that's kind of like what I was finding with these dreams. Not always, sometimes of the 10 that could be checked and that weren't so generic that they were meaningless, I'd find 8 out of 10 could match and 2 couldn't be confirmed. But usually they wouldn't be disconfirmed. Is that a word, disconfirmed?
Sure.
Okay. But, it was either they were confirmed or they couldn't be checked is usually what it came down to. So anyway, I started seeing these kinds of things happen in the dream journal, and a lot of times it was nothing interesting. It was just boring stuff. It was like, I had a dream that I went to the post office and I got stamps with a dinosaur pattern on them, okay? So that day I went to the post office, I had to buy some stamps, and I didn't ask for dinosaur stamps. I had never even seen a dinosaur stamp. It's just they'd just been issued that day, and then that's what they gave me, okay? So big deal. It doesn't really matter. So anyway... the thing is, though, that as I was recording these, I was noticing other kinds of dreams also, okay? And those were kind of interesting. Like the one that I found that kind of made me aware that there was more than just precognition going on actually started with a phone call. An old friend of mine from high school, I won't mention her name because I don't know how she feels about it, but she called me up, and I hadn't talked to her in a long time. I didn't know her particularly well. I'm calling her a friend from high school because I knew her, but she hated my guts. She really disliked me. Anyway, but she called me and she said, "Andrew, have you had any dreams about me recently?" Okay, I'm like, why would you think I had a dream about you? And why is it so important to call me to ask? Which is the first time in my life anybody'd ever done that, right?
So you hadn't talked to her for a long time. She called you up randomly to ask you if you had any dreams of her?
Yes. And recently. She wanted to know if I'd had one recently. And so I asked her the question, and she said, "I'll tell you, but only after you answer my question." Okay? And so I thought about it, and I realized I kind of remembered writing something down that was pertinent to her. So I looked it up. And I told her before I did it, I said, do you mind if I just go up to my room, grab my dream journal, I'll try to find that dream, and then I'll read it to you, and you tell me if it makes any sense, right? That's how I put it to her. And she said, yeah, that's fine. So I got the dream, and it turned out I hadn't written her name down, but I was thinking about her. So I told her what it was, and basically I was looking at a room that I thought was a kitchen, because it was all clean, and it had stainless steel counters, and those swinging doors with the circle in them with the window so you don't bump into people. And the door swung open, and this woman and a man came in, and I thought the woman was a chef because I was interpreting the whole thing to be a kitchen, right? And she had this platter in her hands that had an animal on it. And I couldn't tell what kind of an animal it was, but it definitely had the fur on, okay? So at some point I was thinking, if she's going to cook this thing, it's going to have to lose the fur. But it was all matted and sticking up like a I don't know, like a bristly pig or something like that. You know, it looked really weird. It was all covered with like blood. And so I was thinking that doesn't look like something I'd want to eat. So she sets it down with this guy, and she takes a super sharp knife, who's kind of strange looking to me. And the next thing I know, she's decapitated this animal, and the heads come off. Okay, and we're talking an animal that's like this big, something like that. And then I saw this girl's face in the circular window, and she looked really sad. And that was my friend, this person from high school that I know. And I said, so the reason I thought of you is because of that face, this sad-looking person who's watching all this. So I said, so does that make any sense to you? And she said, yes, it does, which was kind of shocking to me because this is kind of a gross dream. What happened was, on or about that night, her cat had been run over by a car, and she had brought it to the hospital because it hadn't killed the cat, but it had nearly severed the head. Okay, so when she brought it to the veterinary hospital, they were dealing with the head and accidentally fully decapitated the cat, which killed it.
Oh, wow.
Whoa. So basically I was interpreting a room that looked like what could be a kitchen, but was in actuality a veterinary like operating room. And so I interpreted the woman who was the vet as a chef because I was thinking of the room as being a kitchen. You see what I'm saying? So I'm seeing it, but I'm not really understanding it. And I couldn't tell what the animal was because I could see the size, but because it was all mangled, I couldn't really figure out what it was. Do you know what I'm saying? So then I said, all right, so what made you think I would have dreamt about you on this night, right?
Right.
Because that question was like burning a hole in my mind the whole time. And she said, well, it's because I saw you that night. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I'd never heard anything like that before. And she said, well, she was going home and after the cat had died and she was feeling really bad about it. And then she said she saw my face, and I said to her, don't worry about it, your cat's in a better place now. And I was flabbergasted. Now the thing is, look, this particular girl, my opinion, she tends to like really be into this psychic stuff, okay? And so I would have, if you'd asked me, you know, whether I trust her as a witness or not, I'd be kind of iffy on that, except for the fact that she had a set of facts that matched my dream, okay? And that was very convincing to me. Also, she notified me, not the other way around, and she did it in a very timely manner.
So wait, let me ask you this. So when she contacted you, she asked you specifically, have you dreamt about me lately?
Yes.
So I wonder, how would she make the jump from seeing your face to, oh, maybe this is a sign that he dreamt of me?
I don't know if I asked her that or not. It's possible that she knew I remembered my dreams, because most people did know that. Most people I knew, but we're not talking about somebody who was real friendly with me. I mean, she got friendly later, but you know, for quite a while it was like this, she couldn't stand me. But anyway, the thing is, this interaction is what made me think, gee, I wonder if I'm dreaming about other people sometimes, because it had never occurred to me that some of my dreams involving friends and family and so on, they might actually have been doing the things I was dreaming about. Because at that time I was thinking of the psi element of dreams as only pertaining to precognition, right? So I always, if I had a dream about a friend of mine doing something, I would think, well, I guess that's going to happen in the future. But because of this phone call, I decided to go back through those dreams and call the friends and say, did this have anything to do with what you were doing at the time instead? And I found out I was able to verify quite a lot of those that way. So like, for instance, I had a dream about this guy I know who actually wrote a book on precognitive dreams named David Ryback. But he lived in Atlanta and I lived in New Jersey at the time. And I dreamt that he was talking with another man in a parking lot about how the other man had two of his cars had gotten destroyed in the same week in the same kind of an accident, where two separate windstorms knocked branches out of trees and crushed the roof of both cars in separate incidents, right? So I called David and I asked him, does this sound familiar to you? And he's like, no, that hasn't happened to me. And I was like, no, David, I'm not asking if you lost two cars this way, but somebody that you were talking to. And he was like, oh, yeah, that was just this morning. I was like, this happens so often that people listen to you and they have like this way they want to interpret what you're saying, and if the way you say it isn't exactly the way they expect to hear it, they don't confirm it. So so once he realized I was talking about somebody else who was saying this, he's like, yeah, there was this guy who works in the same office building that I rent space in, and I don't know the guy, but I happened to run into him in the parking lot. We were talking, and he told me how, we had this windstorm that had just destroyed one of his cars when a branch fell on the roof, and then last week the same thing happened to his wife's car in a separate windstorm. So the dream was completely accurate. It took a couple extra minutes to get him to verify it. So then I knew I was dreaming about other people in addition to dreaming about the future, okay? So I'll tell you one that happened that involves dice that I didn't believe, okay? So I used to play backgammon when I was a kid, and I worked at a comic book store when I was about 12 years old in San Jose called Comics and Fantasies. There was a guy there named Greg Sisk I used to play. He was like 17, so he was a lot older than me. And it really infuriated him that I won so often. He used to say to me, you don't know what you're doing. You have no strategy, and you win anyway. And it just irritated the heck out of him, right? And so every once in a while, I'll get into like a kind of a playful mood, like I'm going to tease this guy, right? And I said to him, I'll tell you what, Greg, I'm going to predict every roll in this game. I'm going to look at the board, and I'm going to decide what's the best roll for me and the worst roll for you. And I'm going to say what it is, and I'm going to get my good rolls, and you're going to get your bad rolls, and I'm just going to clobber you. I said that before the game started. And I'll tell you, I looked at the board and I said, this is what I want, and I got it. And then he got what I told him he was going to get, and I got what I wanted. And it kept on going for it had to be, I don't know, around 40 rolls or something. And at a certain point in the game, I had all but 2 of his pieces on the bar in the middle of the board, okay? And that's practically impossible to do. And the reason is because the more pieces land on the board, the harder it is to keep them there because there's more opportunities for them to get off. And at that point, he was, the whole time he was like, how are you doing this? How are you doing this? And he picked up the board and he threw it into a plate glass window. Of course, they all just bounced off harmlessly, but that's how mad the guy was because he just didn't understand it. And I was thinking, wow, that was kind of an unusual coincidence. I said this and then this happened. But that was before I was really like paying attention to that kind of stuff. I just thought that was a fluke, okay? But then later, Kitty, my wife, had been telling me that I've been having all these precognitive dreams and I was not believing her. We lived in Vermont at the time. And we were playing backgammon, and I just got this sudden urge to make a prediction. And the prediction was, we're now going to roll descending doubles from 6s to 1s. And I had this, it's almost like somebody was suggesting it to me. It didn't feel like it was coming from me. It was more like somebody had whispered in my ear, hey, if you say this, it's going to happen. Almost like if you have enough confidence to say this, it'll happen. And that was kind of what it felt like, okay? And I was thinking, when the idea came to mind, I was like, boy, that sounds really stupid, and I'm going to look like a moron if I say this, and then it doesn't happen. But then I thought, why not? What the hell? I'll go ahead and do it. So I said it to Kitty. I said, you know what? We're going to now roll matching descending doubles from 6s to 1s. And she proceeded to roll a pair of 6s. I rolled a pair of 6s, pair of 5s, pair of 5s, pair of 4s, pair of 4s. And we are absolutely staring at the dice, looking at this, paying attention to what the prediction was. I mean, our eyes were glued to every single roll. So 4s, 3s, 2s, 2s. And when we got to the second pair of 2s, I kind of freaked out mentally. I lost all confidence. I was like, this is weird. This is way beyond any kind of anything that I've heard is possible by chance. Because the prediction and what's happening, they're identical. And so I said, because I'd lost the confidence, I said, we're not going to get the 1s. And then the next roll was a non-matching pair of numbers. But that was really shocking to me. And that was one of those things that I thought at the time, well, this is never going to happen again. And nothing like this is ever going to happen again. And I kind of wanted to say that was a coincidence, but at the same time I was like, no, not really. That's just not possible.
And what's the odds? I know you looked up and you estimated what were the odds of that actually happening.
Well, I calculated the odds, and it was 4.6 quadrillion to 1 that would ever happen. So I forget if you compare it to the lottery, that makes it 25 million times less likely to happen than the lottery. Okay.
So hold on a second. So you're saying that those rolls, it was 1 quadrillion
One in
one that it would happen.
No, it was 1 in 4.6 quadrillion to 1.
Is that just rolling the rolls, or is that rolling the rolls and you predicting it before it happens?
No, you can't. It's rolling the rolls. You can't add in the prediction. So
right.
that.
So think about that.
Yeah, I know.
It's even more just insane.
Because if you think about, I mean, I've never made a similar prediction other than that one occasion in my entire life. But the reason the odds are so high is because it's a specific sequence of numbers. I'm not just saying I'm going to roll this and then making a separate prediction. I'm saying all at once it's going to be a 6 followed by a 6 followed by a 6 followed by a 6 followed by a 5, a 5, a 5, etc. And that's actually another thing I want to point out, because this leads into the other subject I wanted to talk about, and that is, it felt like somebody was giving me a nudge to do that. It didn't really feel like it came from me. And if you think about it, how could you have described that specific set of numbers more efficiently than that? Okay? That is an extremely efficient way of describing that sequence of 20 numbers. All right? So if you're a poet and you're working on, saying as much as you can with as little as you can, that's poetry, okay? And that also makes it come across kind of like a message, if you understand what I'm saying, okay? So talking about that, when I was looking at my precognitive dreams, I realized that some of them were a little different than others, okay? So I had the cluster of dreams, 5 dreams that related to the events of 9/11 in New York. It didn't have anything to do with the Washington or the Pennsylvania aspects of that episode. But the first one, I was basically told something based on this future event, and the other ones I was just experiencing it and seeing it. A good example of one of the earliest examples of this kind of dream, and this is before I had the dream book, but it's a good example, so I'll use it, has to do with the Ramstein Air Show disaster. I don't know if you remember that, but back in, I think it was 1986 or so, there was an air show in Ramstein, Germany, at the American military air base there, that had this big disaster, which I'll get into in a minute. So 2 weeks before that, I had this dream that a guy came to me in the dream and he said, "Come with me, I want to show you something." And so we went up into the air, and then he pointed to this crowd of people that were in all these reviewing stands on the ground, and just loads and loads of people. And then he pointed in the air, and there were all these airplanes in the air. And specifically he said, "Now watch those 2 planes." And I saw these 2 jets come close together, and then their wingtips just touched, just a little bit. And as soon as that happened, because of the velocity and the vectors they were flying at, they exploded into flames. And I saw one of them goes straight into the reviewing stand and just plows through all these people. Okay, and I'm just spontaneous decapitations and amputations and just horrible things happening to these people. Flames. It was like a big ball of fire. I could actually feel the heat from the flames, and even after I woke up, I could feel it for about the whole time until I saw this on TV. And I just knew loads of people had been absolutely killed or maimed in this disaster. So anyway, I woke up from that, still feeling the heat from the flames, as I said. Of course, I told it to Kitty, like I always did, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. It was just there, like every day as I was working. And then one day a couple weeks later than that, I was working on some illustration in our apartment, and the news was on, and I looked over and had this breaking news alert that basically exactly what I had dreamt had just happened in Ramstein Air Base. They had these 3 Italian planes, and 2 of them came together. Their wingtips just touched. They exploded into a fireball. One of them went into the reviewing stands and just demolished all these people there. It was a horrible accident. It's one of the worst air disasters to ever happen. So the thing is, when I first recorded that, I didn't really think anything of the fact that a guy brought me there to see it. Okay, that really wasn't important to me. I saw this, therefore it's precognitive. But I later found that I have, one group of dreams that seem to be about future events that correlate well with them, where I don't have somebody showing it to me, and then I have another group where somebody does show them to me. And so the reason I got curious about those is that when we were living in Phoenix, we had a flood in our basement that soaked all my dream journals, okay, including this guy here that I showed you just a few minutes ago. And so in the process of drying them out with hair dryers, I was noticing, hey, wait a minute, there's all these dreams that have like this other entity in there, this like independent agent who is telling me something. It's not me just passively seeing something, he's telling me something. And there were more and more of those. And then I also saw there's all these dreams where there's somebody like that who's aware of the fact that I'm asleep, aware of the fact that they're not in a body, so to speak, and they tell me things about more spiritual things as well. And to me, the ideas that were encapsulated in those dreams were far more interesting than the mere fact that precognition occurs. So if you look at like all the dream journals I've got, and I've got 35 now, although the most recent one is basically an endless one because I no longer write them down on paper, I just email them to myself. If you look at all of them, the first group is really focused on evidence. I'm trying to get evidence to prove my wife wrong. And at a certain point, I'm like, I've got so many of these things that there's no way to deny it anymore. So at that point, I'm like, I'm no longer interested in trying to prove this. But I kept on recording them because I just didn't have, nobody said stop, I guess, is kind of what happened. For a little while I did stop. There was a period of maybe, I don't know, I think it was 7 years or so where I didn't write very much down because I was busy working in Hollywood. But then I had a dream about a plane crash, and I thought, what the heck, I'll start writing them down again. So I did, and I've been consistent about it ever since. But at that point, I was really looking at different material in the dreams, trying to ask myself, okay, what's interesting about this? I'm no longer interested in evidence, so what are they telling me, okay? And one dream told me what they were telling me explicitly. In the dream, I was aware that I was asleep, and I was taken to a place where this very beautiful and like almost angelic being told me that some of the dreams I had they were basically given to me by spirits, that they had something that they wanted me to know and that they had to communicate to me.
Wait, hold on a second. So in your dream, you're being told that you're getting messages through your dreams.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I'm just telling you what the dream is. So you don't have to believe it, and I don't have to believe it. I'm just saying what the dream said, and it was an interesting idea. So she said that the spirits that communicate with people who are living, either while they're asleep or not, I suppose, or meditating, they each have their own like style of communication. They have their own knowledge, their own ability, their own way of communicating. And so some of them will, if they have a message, they might show you exactly whatever it is. So they might bring you into a situation and just let you observe it passively so that you can see it. Other times they might explain it to you. Sometimes they might compress it into symbols so that it's clearer and more compact and easier to remember. And that was a big deal. She said it's actually very hard to carry forward information learned in the spirit to being awake and conscious, okay? So she said one thing, the better communicators are very good at compressing messages into symbols. So like if you want to use a biblical example, and this is one of my favorite ones because I love how simple it is the example of the statue made out of different materials where it has the feet of clay and the, I think, head of bronze or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't.
Okay, but it represents different dynasties in this particular period, and the idea is it's strong, and then it's weaker and weaker and weaker until it's going to collapse, basically. But that's what it symbolized, or the 3 fat cows and the 3 lean cows. This is a symbol. It's a really a compressed form of a message that when the lean cows eat the fat cows, this is meaning famine. You're going to have famine. So all of the wealth and the food that you have stored up, it's going to be taken away from you. You're going to be left with nothing. So that's just a very visual, symbolic way of communicating a message. And my looking at it was those messages tend to be the easiest to understand. So to give you an example, if I were to look at like a spirit guide in a dream, and he held in his hand a little model rocket ship, it's easier to understand that as a rocket ship than if I were to walk into a room that had a rocket lying on its side, and like I'm looking at it through a doorway or window where the front and back end of the rocket are blocked from view. It would look like a pipe. I wouldn't have any idea what it is. I'd be looking at a real rocket ship, but the toy in the spirit guide's hand is actually easier to understand as a message. Do you see what I'm saying there?
Sure.
Right. So that's basically what this gal was saying to me in that dream. She was saying that there are different ways to communicate, and sometimes it's verbal, but the verbal ones are really hard to communicate, and the reason is because although you and I are communicating verbally while we're awake, this is only because we're not capable of communicating telepathically. But it's more natural to communicate telepathically as a spirit. So to put abstract ideas that are like very obvious to a spirit into a set of symbols, which they look at words either spoken or written, it's harder to do for them. Does that make sense to you?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and she said it's also harder for us to remember those for the same reason, because we're receiving a message that's basically telepathic, and then we have to translate it into our symbols, which doesn't really make sense because the symbols are on their end meaningless. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I want to back up. I want to kind of approach this from a skeptical view. So, first of all, as far as precognitive dreams, so you have, you told me you have 13,000, dream journal entries, which is one of, if not the largest collection of dreams in the world, right?
Yeah, and actually I'm looking at it right now. So as of this moment, I have 13,150 entries.
So, because I want to make this isn't about you being, having a phenomenal ability. I want to make this like, you're not the only person on the planet that this happens to, right? I've got journals that I've been keeping with precognitive dreams as well. I'm sure there's literally, I don't know how many, I mean, is everyone on the planet, is it potentially that they paid enough attention, they would start to see these things happening in their dreams? Are there, like, how many other people like you or kind of on that level like you are there that exist that you know of?
Well, I'm gonna kind of give you how I feel about this, and there's a bit of a gradient there. When I started recording these and I realized I was having these precognitive dreams, my impression was if anybody bothered to stop and write down their dreams, they would have the same result. That was my assumption at the time, my hypothesis, as it were. So as time went on and I had more and more of these accumulate, and I started realizing I was recording more of these than could be found even in the literature. So what would happen is I'd like read books by researchers who studied dreams, for instance, or studied precognition, and I realized that in my own hands, in my own apartment, I had more good examples of validated precognitive dreams than they had in their whole book. I was kind of surprised by that. So I was figuring what was going on is two things. One, most people don't record their dreams. Okay. Two, most people are so busy with thoughts of their day that it's harder for them to remember their dreams. Okay. And three, also because of mental activity that is related to their conscious waking life, it may push out this kind of dream or push it away from their awareness. Because like one thing I noticed is that I tend to have more dreams like this, and they're more vivid and stronger, easier to remember when I'm spending a lot of my time painting. I'm an artist, so but I've done some things that involve like a lot of work in an office, because I've also been an art director. And when I'm working as an art director, I'm thinking about the office all day long. And when I go to bed and go to sleep, I have a much harder time remembering what's going on, and the dreams are much less interesting than when I've taken 6 months off to paint all day long. So I think that and it's funny, I was talking to one guy about this recently, and he was like, oh yeah, because you let your mind go free and you're open. I was like, no, it's the exact opposite of that. When I'm painting, I'm focused intensely on capturing what I've got in front of me. And it's that focus that allows me to remember this stuff more easily and see this stuff more clearly. When I'm working, I get distracted in a million different directions. And so that's the lack of focus, and that makes it harder to remember this stuff. To me, painting is like meditation. Now, maybe for other people it's different because they're not painting they don't have the same mental atmosphere that I have when I'm doing it. But I thought that was going on. Still, as time went on, I found that I was still recording a lot more of these things than other people were, and it looked like the quality of them was higher as well. And eventually I ran into Stanley Krippner, who's a fairly well-known parapsychologist who studies dreams, at a conference in Amsterdam, otherwise known as Amsterdam here. I used to live in the Netherlands. And I talked to him about it, and he said that he felt that my dreams were he felt I had the highest number of high-quality dreams that he knew of in all of his 30 years of researching at that time. He said that there was one guy he thought had more dreams, but not as many quality dreams as far as veridicality is concerned, and another person who had the quality but not the quantity. And since then, of course, the numbers have gone up. So at that point, I started wondering if maybe my database is unusual, and if the dreams themselves were unusual, as opposed to being something that I could expect anyone to have. So my current opinion on that subject is, if everyone were to calm their mind, learn how to focus it, and write down their dreams, they probably would have similar results. Okay, but it's not just simply a matter of writing down their dreams. I think it's more than that. I think they also have to be able to attain a certain amount of mental focus, the ability to concentrate on one thing and one thing to the exclusion of all others, that would somehow facilitate this sort of dream. That's my guess. It's based on my experience. I don't know if I'm right or not, but that's just what it feels like. But I have one other thing I want to add to that, just because I think it's kind of funny and interesting at the same time. But my family and I were on vacation in Paris, and I had a dream there where I was aware that I was asleep, and I was with somebody else who knew I was asleep, and she said she was asleep, okay? She said, I live in Africa, and our bodies are both asleep right now, so I have to communicate this message to you very quickly because both of us have to wake up soon. And I need to give this message to you before you wake up. And it was a symbolic message about the future. It was a prophetic thing. I'm not going to get into that right now. But the other thing that I thought was interesting about the dream is that she showed me this list of all these people who were getting dreams like this. Okay, and it was pages and pages and hundreds of names that were getting that particular message. So it kind of gave me a way to quantify, if you decide to trust the dream anyway, how many people got that dream anyway, or dreams like it. And it wasn't a small list. It was a huge list. It was hundreds and hundreds of names. And when I thought about that after waking up, it makes sense to me. Of course, I'm looking at a prophetic dream there as opposed to just straight precognition. So I think a precognitive dream that's undirected is much more common than the prophetic ones. Again, that's based on my database, because in my database, the prophetic ones are less common than the precognitive ones. So in numerical terms, I would say you're looking at billions of people could have precognitive dreams and would be aware of it if they tried to record them, and they had the right mental focus. But if you're looking at the prophetic ones that are more special, where it seems to me that maybe some people are just better attuned to this for some reason or another. Maybe their profession makes it easier to focus or to catch the message. But you're probably still looking at thousands of people are getting those. And the only reason I think that's important to note is that the idea of, I really hate this because the word prophet and prophecy is loaded with baggage. Way back in ancient times, I don't think it was loaded with the same baggage, and it was easier to use those words without, getting all tripped up by people, who believe in this doctrine or that one. But back then, it wasn't such a special thing. Saying that you had a prophetic dream is basically the same as you telling me last night I had a dream and it happened to come true.
And Andrew, let me ask you this: can you clarify again, please, the difference in a concise way, the difference between what you're calling a precognitive dream and a prophetic dream?
Oh yeah, well, a precognitive one I just look at as undirected, and a prophetic one is one where someone is there telling me what's happening. The precognitive one, for all I know, there's like this independent agent that comes into the dream and shows me this stuff, but I don't remember that. But regardless, I'm passively seeing the events unfold as they actually happen. The problem with that is I oftentimes don't understand what I'm seeing. I can describe what I'm seeing, but I don't know what it is. Like, for instance, one of the 9/11 dreams, I was confused by the fact that the damage I was seeing looked like what I would expect from an earthquake. But I heard people in the dream saying that it was caused by bad people who had taken hostages, and that they had done it twice in a row in a very short span of time, meaning, one building and then the other. And I didn't understand any of that. So I recorded it, but I was like, this looks like an earthquake to me. And yet everybody in the dream was saying it wasn't, that it was caused, that people caused it to happen. And another aspect of the same dream actually was it looked like winter to me, but I didn't know why it looked like winter. And one thing that was a confusing factor is that I did note that the people were dressed like it was summer. So I was looking at clothing that did not match a winter scenario, but it looked like winter to me. Now that made sense later, because when the buildings collapsed, they created this huge ash cloud that dumped itself on everybody and everything, and it did look like winter. It looked like everything had been snowed on. So in that case, I saw what it looked like, but I didn't know what it was. It's almost like when I'm in a dream like that, it's almost like I'm a child looking at it the way a child would look at it. They don't know what anything is, but they see it just as well as any adult walking around on the same street.
Right. So let's again, I want to kind of bring this down to kind of ground level. So what do you think is going on with precognitive dreams? How can people like you and me and all those other people out there that are having these things, what is actually happening here? How in the world can we get an idea in our brain and then later in time that thing happens?
Okay, well, without claiming to know the definitive answer to that, my current suspicion is that time is, it's like three dimensional in the sense that if you're looking at our lifespan as something that goes along a tape measure, it's linear, right? So you have a start and an end, and it all goes in a line. I'm looking at it more as being like the surface of an orange, where you can have a point of time on one side of the orange and another point of time on the other side of the orange, and you're not on the orange. You can see both at the same time. Do you know what I'm saying? So as a spirit, they're both available to look at. You can just turn the orange and see different parts of it. The key is you can't see it from that perspective when you're on the orange. You have to be off of it to see it, and that requires seeing it from like more of a spiritual point of view. Golly, I hate to say it this way because I know there are people out there who don't like the idea of souls and they don't like the idea of spirits, but I think that's the explanatory principle here, is that it's our spirit that sees it, because it's at that level that we have the sensory apparatus, or the lack of sensory apparatus, that makes it possible for those things to be clear. And that when we put ourselves in our bodies, it's kind of like, you have the example I like to use, and I don't think I've ever told anybody this now that I think of it, but is of a security guard at the security station in a prison. So you've got a security guard, he's in a little room, a control room, he's got, say, 10 panels, and on those 10 panels he's got cameras pointed at 10 different cells, right? So he can see all of those cells at the same time, but each camera can only see one cell at a time. So our life, our perspective when we're waking and conscious is that of one camera. But our perspective when we're sleeping as a spirit is of the security guard who can see all the cameras at the same time. Do you see what I mean? But he still can't see the cameras for a different prison or a corporation that has security cameras either, because he needs to be connected to it somehow, by his job. And so I kind of look at our identities. So like you're Kevin and I'm Andrew, right? So the fact that I'm Andrew gives me maybe like the psychic or spiritual password that allows me to turn into certain cameras that are pointed at my life. Do you see what I'm saying? So then I can see what's going on in the future or the past there. But I can't see yours maybe, or I can't see somebody in Bangladesh that I've never met. Maybe I can because I happen to accidentally type in the wrong numbers or something, but that's how I look at it. It's like you've got this control room, and you do have this different perspective when you're sleeping. What facilitates it, I'm not really sure, but I've gradually come around to the position that we have souls. You can call them spirits if you want. That those do survive bodily death, but that even while we're living, that those spirits have this other perspective, and you can access it while you're sleeping or while you're meditating. And I don't like to say this because, number one, I don't have any personal experience with it, and I don't want any personal experience with it, but I also think it happens when people are on drugs. But the thing is that experience is, as far as I can tell from what I've read about it anyway, it is severely crippled by the effects of the drug that change the experience to something that is much less clear than it would be otherwise. So I consider those to be really inferior versions of the use of one's spiritual vision, I guess you could call it. Boy, I hate to use these terms. They sound new agey. I apologize for that.
No, it's okay. I'm going to throw out some spiritual terms as well. So let me just kind of throw out some ideas here. So some things in my mind that are maybe connected. So there's, all the evidence of the twin studies where a twin is in one part of the world, something happens to the other twin, and that twin feels it, right? So somehow they're feeling something that is very much separated by space, but somehow they're able to have that cognition. Or even maybe women with their menstrual cycles getting synchronized when they're living together. Maybe that could be like there's some sort of like hormonal thing because they're in proximity. So maybe that's not such a good example.
I was kind of thinking the same thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, that is pretty crazy, that happens. But what about also, in a lot of Eastern religious and philosophical traditions, there's this idea that our essential identity is God, right? And I'm not saying that that's necessarily true or not true, but that's not an idea in some of these Eastern philosophies that essentially, when you come right down to it, all is one, and we're part of that, right?
Yeah.
If that's true. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting to the point where I want to start giving you answers on this stuff. Look, I really, normally what I like to do when I write about these subjects is I don't like to put my opinion in. What I like to do is I say, this is what I wrote down in my journal on this date, and then on this other date, this thing happened, and this is how they correlate, and then I do a little statistical analysis, and I say, based on this analysis, this looks highly unlikely to be the result of chance. That's how I like to write it, because then the person who's reading it has the opportunity to make up their own mind based on a very neutral reading of the evidence that I've presented. Now, the question you're asking me is starting to get into my opinions of these things, okay? So at this point, I actually think it makes sense that there is God, okay, period. That makes a lot more sense to me than the idea that there isn't, all right? And that's based partly on observations in our waking environment, but it's also based in part on these dreams I've had and my reading of various subjects. As far as whether it's all one or not in Eastern religions, I find fault with every religion, just so you know, okay? And I'm not saying I'm a brilliant guy for finding fault with every religion or that I'm right. It's just that no matter what it is, I think that the religions are based on people's experiences like these that I'm talking about here, spiritual experiences, and then they've created like doctrine and dogma based on those experiences. And to some extent, they get it right, and to other extents, they get it wrong. And so when I'm looking at this and I compare what, like they say in Hinduism or Christianity or Judaism or whatever to my own experiences, I kind of have a way of saying, okay, that doesn't match what I've experienced. And in this particular case, I've been able to verify it. So I'm going to trust myself more than this doctrine, okay? So I've found flaws with a lot of them. But at the same time, I've also found a lot of things that make sense to me and do jive with my experience quite well. So for that reason, I do believe in God. I do believe in spirits. I do believe in a connection. I do believe that we have a purpose as spirits and that we learn things in our physical bodies. And actually, as far as precognition is concerned, I think for the most part, we negate the value of our lives if we know too much about the future. Because then the experiences of our lives are no longer a true test of how we're going to react in these situations. Because as far as I can tell, one of the primary things that is achieved by living these lives is that we learn things. And we don't learn them because we memorize them. We learn things because we experience them and have a chance to react to them in a genuine way. So if we know what's going to happen, that's no longer a genuine reaction anymore, because now we can change how we react based on what we know of the future. I grew up in poverty when I was a kid. We moved around all the time. My mom was losing her jobs all the time. We were on welfare. We lived in our car from time to time. I would I was actually fairly good at making money as a kid, but it would go away in all these strange ways really quickly. I'd accumulate this comic collection that today is worth millions of dollars, and I had to sell it to pay for a move for my mother, and that kind of thing used to happen a lot. And it used to really frustrate me. So then I had this dream that explained the reason those things were happening to me was so that I could understand how to lose things and not care about it. Okay? The idea was to strengthen me to the idea that I can survive the loss of all this stuff, that it wasn't as important as I thought it was. Okay?
So it was an interesting idea you had about if we knew the future, then we're unable to react essentially authentically in certain situations, and that's where the learning takes place. because then, sometimes when people think, well, if again, if these Eastern traditions are correct, I'm not saying they are, but let's just do a thought exercise and consider that maybe they are. If they are correct, then why would we be here in this form where we are not omnipotent or omniscient and know everything? And so the idea, and it's just a theory, I know, but the idea that, oh, if we knew everything, then it would be impossible for us to learn. That sounds pretty good. It's a pretty powerful idea in my mind, at least.
Yeah, well, it makes sense to me. And, actually, I had a dream on this very subject a while back. I'm going to try to encapsulate it pretty quickly. But you've heard of life reviews and near-death experiences, right?
Yeah.
Well, I had a life preview in a dream, okay? So in this dream, I basically went back to the moment when I chose this life, okay? And in it, what happened? And I was totally aware that I was dreaming and asleep, and I actually felt more awake in the dream than I do now, conscious talking to you. But essentially, what happened was I was shown my entire life from birth to death, and every single person who I would ever contact or have anything to do with my life, anyone who'd be affected by me, and anyone who I would affect. And I saw how all those people reacted to everything I did and how I reacted to everything they did, all the way out till there were no more ripples from anything I did or said or anything that they did that affected me. And after seeing all of this, I was looking at like all these events that were like unpleasant to experience, but they had value to them. And what it was, then the guy says, "So would you accept this life?" And I said, "Yes, I will." And the reason I did was because I saw that even though some things were unpleasant, I learned something from it. And overall, I saw that I learned things that I wanted to learn. So it was like I had this goal. I want to learn this. I want to learn that. I want to learn the other thing. And this particular life allowed me to learn those things. But in some cases, the way I learned them wasn't necessarily the most pleasant thing to go through. But I learned them. And so for that reason, I was willing to do it. But the other thing is, it was also clear that I had choices I could make within it. It was almost like, here's a simulation where we set all these things up for you, where in some cases it's definitely going to happen this way, but there are points where there are decisions you're going to make, and that can change it. Do you see what I'm saying? So like when you're at Disneyland, the rides are there for you to ride, but what you do while you're on the ride is up to you. Okay, you can wave your hands around or keep them in or whatever, but you're still going to go on that ride. So that's kind of how I looked at the life. It was like I'm picking the ride I'm going to go on, and how I react to that ride is up to me, and that determines what I'm going to learn. Do you see what I'm saying?
So you believe in free will?
Yeah, I do, but I also believe that the free will we exercise is within constrained limits that are determined by the life that we're leading. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. Do you ever come across? I typically value a skeptical viewpoint. I think it's easy to, especially when you're getting into psychic stuff and dreams and all this stuff, it's easy to, an idea sounds good, so it must be true. So do you ever come across bullshit in the dream, like precognitive dream research or literature or people out there that you're just like, this person's full of shit?
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating to answer this question, because I have to tell you, my reaction to almost everything I read in parapsychology is this is baloney, okay? And I this includes stuff that I later changed my mind on, but for the most part, I think this is a bunch of hocus pocus.
So Andrew, are there groups online of people who are having precognitive dreams where they go and they share their stories to try to maybe gather together on a larger scale evidence of this happening?
I think I've seen stuff like that, but I remember not being particularly interested in it after a while. I mean, Skeptico.com has people who occasionally will share it. Like, if I post something, I'll get like one of my articles, it may be 4 or 5 people will suddenly post their dreams that happened. Is there any place to go where you're going to find a lot of people talking about this kind of thing? That made me think of this database, because that's one of those places where people talk about it. And it made me think of the NDERF page, because that's another place where people talk about this kind of thing. Not specifically precognition, but psi. And And when I look at them, I think the Ender page has a higher number of what appear to be genuine experiences to me than the Kelly Bukele dream website. Okay, so he's aggregating all these dreams. When I look at Skeptico, I find a very small number, but I think the reason is you have so many harsh skeptics there that it kind of makes people not want to contribute anything because they expect the interaction with other people is going to be really unpleasant.
So, what's your advice to people who occasionally have a precognitive dream? Do you have any advice for those people?
Well, look, if if you have one and you don't believe it's possible, I urge you to investigate whether it's possible, because the knowledge that it does happen is actually I wouldn't say life changing, but it teaches you something that I think is an important thing to learn, and that is that not all the things you believe to be true are true, and some of the things you believe to be false are true, and that I think is always useful because it improves your ability to discern the truth in general. And I would say overall, if someone was to ask me, if you were to ask me, what do you think is the most important thing you can possibly get out of life? I would say the ability to tell the difference between true and false. And this is just one aspect of that. So if you, through investigation of your own dreams, are able to see something correctly as true or false in a way that is an improvement on what you thought before, you've already improved yourself. And not only have you improved yourself, you've improved yourself in a way that is going to affect the way you interact with all sorts of other things going forward. But one thing I will say is not likely to happen is you're not going to be having dreams about subject matter that will change your life in a material sense, and I wouldn't be expecting that. I wouldn't want you to get the idea that, oh wait, I'm having precognitive dreams, I'm going to dream about the lottery or who's going to win at poker tomorrow, and I'm going to make a lot of money that way. I kind of doubt that's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens now and then, because that's the challenge for that person, is how do you deal with that, okay? But I don't look at it personally as a vehicle for some kind of practical result like that. To me, the practical result is I know something I didn't know before, and that already is value. I do find it kind of annoying when people interpret precognition as something to be used in a materialistic way, because I just don't look at it like that.
Yeah, and I would imagine whatever's out there that could, in my mind, I imagine that probably would reduce the likelihood of those sorts of precognitive dreams happening if you're using it for selfish, self-centered, reasons.
Yeah, it's kind of like, would you rather have $1 million or a wife who loves you for the rest of your life? I mean, I'd rather have the wife, and I got it, so I'm totally happy as far as that's concerned. I dreamt about her before we got married, or before I even met her. We got married. We've been together ever since. She's my first date, my only date, and that's going to be the way it is, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm happy. But truth, I think, is a really valuable commodity. It never goes out of style, and it's very hard to find if you don't know where to look or how to look. So as far as I'm concerned, looking at evidence provided by your dreams can actually help you. But you have to be really careful not to be too credulous, okay? Because it'd be very easy to take all sorts of, I've had dreams where I'm looking at them and I know they didn't happen and I know they can't happen, okay? I have to pay attention to those also. I have to take those into the context of all the rest of this stuff so that I don't get gulled into believing that I have to take action based on all this stuff. In fact, I'll tell you this, and I really want to emphasize this, I don't do anything based on my dreams. I write them down, I talk about it, I talk about what they mean to people, and I write about what they mean to me sometimes. But I don't have a dream that says, stay away from black cats, and then I stay away from black cats. I'll dream about something, and I just wait and see what happens. Okay? And that's just the way it is. I don't interact with the information the way other people might want me to.
What about, though, didn't you move based on a dream?
Well, yeah, okay, all right. So I guess I did in that case. But all right, so now I have to take back part of it. But that's a long time ago, and I stopped doing that after a while. But yeah, I did. That was the 9/11 one. But that was because I was told to in the dream. Normally, I'm not told to do anything. Normally, I'm actually shown something, as opposed to being. And when I'm warned of something, the warning is not so much for me. Like when I dreamt about the Boxing Day tsunami, That wasn't really a warning. It was just they were saying, this is going to happen, and because this is happening, we want you to trust, or I want you to trust the other half of the dream, which concerns a more spiritual event. Okay. So the Boxing Day tsunami did happen, so I was like, okay, now I'm left with the decision, do I want to trust the spiritual half of the dream or not? Okay. And the funny thing is I kind of don't want to make up my mind on that. I want to be able to prove the other half, but I can't because it doesn't have a material component to compare it to. So if I have a dream where, like for instance, I've had dreams where I'm told that I am just as responsible for my thoughts in a dream and my actions in a dream as I am for my thoughts and actions in conscious life. Okay, so how can I verify that? What can I compare that to in real life? In waking life, there's nothing I can compare it to. There's no way to validate that it's true. You could say it makes sense, and maybe it does to some people, and maybe it doesn't to other people. But that's as far as you can go as far as validating it is concerned. But from what I've seen in my dreams, I actually do think it makes sense. So, and what I found is that like I'll get a lesson like that in a dream, and then my behavior changes in my dreams from that point forward. So like I'll see that I've had a certain type of dream in my dream journal, and then like for instance in one case I've had spirit guide types come up to me and say, it's better if you avoid acknowledging the ghosts that you see in your dreams, because I see a lot of ghosts in my dreams, because if you pay attention to them, they will become interested in you and they will try to communicate through you, and they're never going to let you alone because you can't see them. And so ever from that point on, I noticed in my dreams, I try to avoid them and not to acknowledge their presence. And it's really changed the quality of those dreams. So I can see myself like learning and changing my behavior in my dreams as well as in real life.
Got it. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. And thanks for kind of opening up, hopefully people who listen to this podcast or watch it, open up their mind a little bit to things that could be true, but also keeping a skeptical viewpoint that's focused on evidence. Is there any resources you want to share with my audience at the end here?
The one that I like the best, as I said before, is Dr. Ian Stevenson's research. Now, you might wonder why I'm suggesting that they look up a guy whose research concerns itself with reincarnation. But the reason is, number one, I think his methodology is good. His research encompasses decades. He has had many, many researchers replicate his results around the world. He's dealing with spontaneous cases, which tend to have the greatest strength. But also, as a component of many of these cases, you find examples of precognition and telepathy and out-of-body experiences and things like that as well. There are researchers who tend to focus on really dry data that's hard to appreciate. But I think that Ian Stevenson's research is something that's easy to grasp. It's a macro scale of phenomenon. And the other thing I think is really important is that if Stevenson's research is correct, then we do have a soul or a spirit that survives death, and that explains all the rest. And if there's a soul, and that's how people communicate, and it's the natural state that we enjoy, then that explains precognition, it explains telepathy, it explains psychokinesis and out-of-body experiences, and every other type of psi phenomena you can imagine. All of this is explained if you believe that there are spirits or souls, okay? All of it. But anyway, that's why Stevenson's important. All the rest of it, I think, is kind of less important because it's a side effect of the existence of a soul. So I look at precognition as a side effect, and the same thing goes for out-of-body experiences and all the rest of it.
All right. Awesome, Andrew. Well, hey, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.